Hello, my name's Morrison Nolan. I'm a PhD student in paleontology at Virginia Tech. And for a long time, I've consumed a lot of interesting podcasts and other recorded information. And I've often thought that, maybe I want to dip my feet into that. I have a lot of things that I want to tell people about that I'm excited to share. And in these unusual times, this is an interesting opportunity for all of us to both get our voices out there and to have potentially receptive audiences. And one thing that I've wanted to talk about for a long time relates to my love of paleontology, and that's museums. Talking about the museums that I visited, talking about the things that I think that they do well, and talk about things that I'd like to see museums cover in a little bit more depth. Obviously, now is not a great time to be visiting museums, but behind every good museum, there are good researchers, scientists, and science communicators. And so I'd like to take this time to do some interviews with some fellow paleontology students of mine to try to humanize them a little bit more and get some of the background and backstories of where our paleontologists come from. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and tell you a little bit about some of my friends here at Virginia Tech, and hopefully start to reach out to students and researchers at other institutions as well. So I look forward to you guys joining me on this interesting phase of my new podcast, Muview with Mo. And I'm Morrison Nolan. Thank you. And for our first guest, I've invited my friend, Devin Hoffman, who, like me, is a PhD student in paleontology at Virginia Tech. Devin, why don't you tell a little bit about your backstory, like where you come from academically and where you grew up?
Of course, yeah, and thank you for inviting me, Morrison. So I originally grew up in a little town just outside of Ottawa, Ontario. And then I was about 10 when we moved to the States. And yeah, I've kind of grown up in North Carolina, attended undergrad at Appalachian State in North Carolina, and then continued living in the Appalachian region here at Virginia Tech.
Nice, nice. So now let's talk a little bit about your interest and early dabblings with paleontology. How would you say you got into paleo?
Well, I think it pretty closely follows my life story. Because essentially as long as I can remember, I've been interested in paleo in general. I was one of those like dino kids in kindergarten who had a favorite dinosaur that wasn't T-Rex.
Has your favorite dinosaur changed over the years?
It has not. Stuck with Dilophosaurus. Not because of Jurassic Park, but because of When Dinosaurs Roamed America, which is sort of the American version of the BBC's Walking with Dinosaurs.
It's personally, I've always been a big fan of sauropods in general and Camarasaurus in particular.
They're very neat animals.
Yeah, they are. But so sorry to sidetrack there, but let's get back to a little bit of kind of your history.
So I got sidetracked. So I was kind of lucky in that in the neighborhood I lived in, they had dug a sort of drainage ditch behind our house. And it was just chock full. It was basically cutting through a fossiliferous limestone.
Oh, nice. What age and what kind of material?
I'm fairly certain it was Carboniferous. I'm pretty sure Mississippian, but lots of crinoids, brachiopods, bryozoans, things like that. Kind of a invertebrate hash.
Yeah. Paleozoic sushi.
Yeah, yeah. Really crunchy sushi. But yeah, so I'd spend lots of days in the summer digging there. And then I was also fortunate that my parents were very kind in humoring my interest in paleontology. Neither of them really knew much about it or thought it was any kind of viable career option. But they weren't going to tell little 3-year-old Devin that. So yeah, growing outside of Ottawa, we'd make, weekend trips to the Nature Museum and see the dinosaur displays there. And my dad's whole side of the family lives in southern Alberta. So during, summer vacations to visit them, we'd go to, Dinosaur Provincial Park, the Royal Tyrrell Museum, see some
I've not been to the Royal Tyrrell. I'd like to find my way there at some point.
Yeah, highly recommend. It's a very cool museum in a very cool region of Canada. But yeah, and then when I moved to the States, we moved to about 45 minutes outside of Raleigh, which is where the North Carolina Museum of Natural Science is, which also has a very nice paleontology program, and was also where the North Carolina Fossil Club, an amateur paleontology group, would host their meetings. So I was able to attend those on Sundays every other month. As part of that, we'd go on collecting trips, mostly for invertebrate fossils, but collected petrified wood in North Carolina, collected blastoids in northern Alabama. I took part in a lot of outreach events. North Carolina Fossil Club would, set up booths and display specimens at a lot of, local festivals, science fairs, things like that. So I was always involved in that kind of middle through high school. So I think, yeah, by high school, my parents had accepted that I was going into paleontology. And at that point, they knew a bit more about it. I hooked my mom into paleontology. She was about as involved in the Fossil Club as I was by high school.
It's nice when you can get your parents to come along with you on those collection trips.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if my dad appreciates it as much because now she has just hundreds of pounds of rocks and like shelly fossils that they have to move around.
Yeah, all that unsorted stuff that none of it's any good, but you still, you want to go through it someday in case there's something interesting in it.
Yeah.
So it just sits in your garage, your basement, in a box for years and years.
Yep. Though when they moved out to Albuquerque, they did downsize a little bit and took only the best fossils and rocks.
In fairness, in Albuquerque, they're probably not too far away from some other good quality rocks.
That's true. There's some really nice rocks out there. But yeah, when I was looking at undergrad programs, I was looking in-state primarily, and there were kind of two paleontology kind of research groups at public universities in North Carolina, primarily Appalachian State, where I ended up going, and then North Carolina State University, NC State. And I chose Appalachian primarily because it was an undergrad only program for geology, which is where the paleontologists were. So there was a lot more opportunity for undergraduate research. And yeah, I jumped right in, started doing undergrad research my first semester with Dr. Andy Heckert, who does a lot of Triassic paleontology, primarily with crocodilian line reptiles. So that's kind of how I got hooked into the Triassic in particular. That time period was through undergrad research.
Yeah.
And it's
Dawn
something.
of the dinosaurs.
Yes, Dawn of the Dinosaurs. I was originally most interested in kind of early dinosaurs, but was converted over to crocodile line reptiles a little. But I still like dinosaurs.
Yeah. For the benefit of our listeners who maybe don't have as much of a paleo background as we do,
Mhm.
both dinosaurs and crocodilians belong to a group of reptiles called archosaurs. That also includes modern birds, pterosaurs, and a couple of other groups, including another group of reptiles that you do work on now, the aedosaurs, correct?
Correct, yes. So Aedosaurs are a really cool group of extinct archosaurs that are on the crocodile side of the archosaur tree of life. Um, but they are primarily herbivores, mostly plant eaters. And they're also, what makes them really notable is they were super heavily armored with bony plates that we call osteoderms, which just translates to osteo, bone, derm, skin. It's just big plates of bone that float in the skin. And they had these around their necks, all along their back, their bellies, their limbs, their tails. They were essentially all like entirely covered in armor plates, basically everything except their eyes. Some even had cloacal osteoderms.
Oh,
Um,
that sounds
the
inconvenient, frankly.
I suppose they were at least partially mobile.
But so now here at Virginia Tech, you work with Dr. Sterling Nesbitt. Would you like to talk about some of the places that you've gotten to visit, both with Sterling and on your own as part of your PhD research?
Yeah. So Sterling it also does a lot in the Triassic period. One of the reasons I was really interested in coming here, as well as Dr. Michelle Stocker, who's also at Virginia Tech. So a lot of the field work that I've done with the Virginia Tech group has been in the American Southwest, primarily in Arizona, but New Mexico as well. So Arizona is kind of our primary site. We have a collaboration with the Petrified Forest National Park near Holbrook, Arizona. So we do a lot of field work in conjunction with them, both in the park as well as outside of the park, primarily looking for these late Triassic reptiles, sort of the first dinosaurs, as well as members like Aedosaurs and other crocodile relatives. But we found lots of non-reptiles as well. A paper came out recently. I wasn't a part of it, but it was part of this field work out of Virginia Tech and Petrified Forest of North America's oldest frog is from one of the sites.
Oh, that's Michelle's recent paper, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that sounded very neat.
Yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff out there. So that's kind of the primary focus for field work. Also related to my research, I've been able to go, I have a collaborator in South Africa, and that's looking at early Triassic reptile assemblage. So we're looking at, within 1 million or 2 years following the end Permian mass extinction, which was the largest of any mass extinction in Earth history. Estimates range to about 90% of all marine life went extinct, and somewhere around 70 to 80% of all terrestrial life went extinct. So a really extreme mass extinction that eventually gave rise to many of the forms of life we're familiar with today, such as dinosaurs, in our time birds, crocodiles, lizards, frogs, salamanders. But yeah, lots of those originated in the Triassic. So we're looking at one of these really early sites. And as part of that, I got to visit some collections in South Africa, spent a couple of weeks in Johannesburg at the Evolutionary Studies Institute, as well as the National Museum in Bloemfontein in South Africa. So it's been a really interesting project, lots of new animals that no one's seen yet, and it's a really interesting time period. And I got to meet a lot of really cool South African paleontologists.
Would you say that a fair summary of your research is that you work on extracting, cleaning, and then extensively documenting and measuring fossils, specifically of Aedosaurs, and then comparing those measurements between both collections that you have access to and other collections to look at how morphology is changing over time and how that might relate to broader changes in ecology and environment during these major extinction events and other periods of biological origination?
Yeah. So that's the focus of one of my major projects. So I'm looking at the morphology, the shape of a lot of Aedosaur, both their armor as well as their skulls, limbs, and other bones, and looking at how we, in addition to just using that morphology to see how things might be related, but actually reconstructing how quickly or slowly these different bones were evolving, and how that compares, through time, and what that tells us about how these groups are evolving at, the origination when they first evolve all the way through towards the end of the Triassic, Aedosaurs going extinct with the end Triassic mass extinction.
Cool, cool. So we've mentioned here and there a couple of museums that you've been affiliated with. You've talked about getting to visit the Tyrrell Museum, the Natural History Museum of North Carolina. What's another museum that maybe you don't necessarily have a collaborator with, but that you have felt very invested in and have enjoyed and learned a great bit from?
It's a good question. I've been to a lot of museums, something I enjoy quite a bit. And yeah, I mean, the Nature Museum in Ottawa, I never had any collaborators with, or the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. Both of those I have fond childhood memories of visiting, and kind of, yeah, sparking that enjoyment of natural history in general and specifically paleontology. Um, the Shield Museum in Western North Carolina. It's a smaller museum in Gastonia.
I visited that a couple of months ago. I rather enjoyed it. For being a
Yes.
small museum, it had some very high quality taxidermy.
Yes, yeah, it's a really nice museum, and when I was an undergrad, I did a lot of outreach there, as part of their kind of science festivals.
Mhm.
Um, so
One
that
thing that I remember thinking was very nice about that museum is that it was very near a large number of elementary and middle schools and a large number of parochial schools as well. And I was thinking that that was very fortunate for all of those schools being so nice, so near such a nice little museum.
Yeah, and a lot of the schools had half days on the like science and paleo festivals, so that the students could attend,
Oh, nice, nice.
which was very nice. That they're thinking of kind of these taking advantage of educational opportunities in the community. Um, and then another museum I'm been heavily invested in is we have the McKinney Museum at Appalachian State, um, which was a kind of teaching and educational museum that was a part of a lot of my labs as an undergrad. Uh, I also did um, a lot of tours for visiting elementary through high school groups, would go through there. And then as an undergrad, I was a TA for introductory geology labs. So I'd have labs either in there or before like midterms or finals, I'd have review sessions in there. So that was something that I think, yeah, museum collections on university campuses are really useful. In addition to research, also for education and outreach.
Mhm. Uh, Much earlier, you mentioned that as a child there was a British documentary series that you were very fond of, and I apologize, I don't remember the name of the documentary series offhand.
Walking with Dinosaurs.
The was that the British version?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
Are,
Yeah, done by the BBC.
are there any other uh, major pieces of media or documentaries that you feel are especially informative or quality installments for people looking to learn more about the Earth's past?
Um, I mean, yeah, I've really enjoyed Walking with Dinosaurs, and then they also had sort of additions to that afterwards, Walking with Monsters, which essentially covers the Paleozoic, Walking with Beasts, which covers the Cenozoic, and I believe there's also like a Walking with Humans or something like that, which I haven't seen, but it covers hominid evolution. Um, and yeah, some of the information in there, it came out in the early 2000s, so some of the information there is no longer up to date, but it's still quite enjoyable and fairly educational.
What is uh, an animal system or research collection that you have not worked with that you'd like to work with at some point in your burgeoning paleo career?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'd really like to get to the uh, University of California, Berkeley Museum of Paleontology. Um, there's some really cool fossils, especially Triassic fossils, that were collected even as far back as the 40s. Some important fossils in there that I'd like to be able to see at some point.
Berkeley is
Um,
also of great interest to me paleontologically because that is the home base of Dr. Mary Drosser, who is a big force in the paleontology of the Ediacaran and early Cambrian, and she has a lot of interesting material there as well.
hmm, that's not who just published on that oldest bilaterian
It's
trace.
I have that paper. It's the paper about that material from Australia.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have that up real quick. Let me see who
It was.
published that.
I remember it was from a California university. I can't remember if it was UC Riverside or UC Berkeley.
Yeah. Let me see real quick. And I might
Sorry
have,
to.
yeah, and I was about to say I might have confused that real quick. I believe Drosser is at Riverside. Um, or no, what am I saying? Ah, okay. Yeah, it's like I said, I have that paper open here if my computer will agree with me.
But yeah, in terms of other animal groups, I've sort of dipped my toes into Archosauromorphs,
Mm.
which are essentially groups of reptiles that are not quite, so they don't share that last common ancestor with birds and crocodiles, so they're not true archosaurs, but they're more closely related to archosaurs than any other reptile group.
Mm.
They were basically mostly only around in sort of the end Permian through the Triassic. A few lasted a little longer, but primarily, yeah. Um, and there's some really interesting groups that are covered in that I got to see while I was in South Africa, but haven't worked with formally.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I was misremembering. Mary Drosser is with University of California, Riverside, not
Mm.
Berkeley. That was my bad. But Mary Drosser is on that paper that you mentioned, the first author on that is Scott Evans, who actually came and visited Virginia Tech earlier this year, which was pretty neat.
Oh yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Dr. James Gelling is also on this paper, who is a person I had the pleasure of meeting at a academic field trip last year, and I was very glad to get to meet him. So we've covered a lot of ground today. Is there anything else kind of paleo or science related that you'd like to share to our eager and engaged audience?
Um, I I mean, there's a lot of cool science out there. Even if you're not, maybe near a museum or one of these kind of amateur paleontology or whatever other science you're interested in.
And there are a lot of those amateur
Yes.
paleontology and geology groups. You're probably closer to one than you think.
Hmm. Yeah, basically every state has one
At
at
least.
least.
At least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even if you're not able to go to those, maybe there's quite a lot of good um, good science that you can even follow on like social media. I know quite a few scientists have very active Twitters, and they're constantly sharing recent research if you're interested in that. Um, Various other websites post more popular press articles of recent scientific discoveries. So there's an exciting time where you don't have to be the in the academy, as it were, to hear about and keep up with the latest discoveries.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Mr. Devin. It was really glad to get to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we are recording now. So reveal all of your most intimate secrets.
Um, my most intimate secret is that I have.
Ah, that's a good one. Okay, let's test this now.